Mojtaba Khamenei's camp can point to an early diplomatic win as Putin moves quickly to lend a helping hand amid war. Did Russia and Iran just checkmate America? United States bashed by this big genius move by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia has effectively broken through the sanctions wall and dispatched 13 tons of humanitarian medical aid to Iran. The 13-ton shipment of medicines reached Azerbaijan for onward transfer to Iran, while US was blaming oil market turmoil on the war. As chaos around the Strait of Hormuz continues to disrupt energy flows, Russia has emerged as the first reported country to send aid to Iran.
It is not the time to relax sanctions on Russia. And just to put it also in perspective, Russia has been earning, we're informed, $150 million per day on additional revenues from oil sales since the beginning of the conflict in the Middle East, which makes Russia probably the biggest beneficiary of this conflict.
The only thing prohibiting transit in the Straits right now is Iran shooting at shipping. It is open for transit should Iran not do that.
Russia's Emergency Situations Ministry said on March 12 that it had sent humanitarian aid to Iran, marking one of Moscow's first concrete relief steps since the war and signaling visible support for Tehran during the crisis. According to Anadolu News, citing the Russian statement, a total of 13 tons of aid was sent to Iran through Azerbaijan, with a shipment consisting mainly of medicines and emergency medical supplies. The Russian government said the aid delivery was carried out on the direct orders of President Vladimir Putin, underlining that the operation had approval from the very top of the Kremlin leadership. Russia's Emergency Situations Ministry statement said, and I quote, "The ministry's aviation organized the delivery of medicines to the Republic of Azerbaijan for subsequent transfer to authorized representatives of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran." Unquote. Russia is also being described in reports as the first country to send humanitarian assistance to Iran after the US and Israel launched the war on February 28, highlighting Moscow's early effort to position itself as Tehran's external backer. According to the Russian embassy in Kenya and other reports, the 13 tons of medical supplies were transported using an IL-76 aircraft, a heavy-lift military transport plane often used for emergency humanitarian deliveries. Russia delivered the aid first to Azerbaijan, which is expected to assist in transferring the shipment onward to Iranian authorities, creating a land-linked handover route into Iran rather than a direct delivery into the war zone. Meanwhile, the United States and its European allies appear increasingly divided over the issue of sanctions relief for Russia, exposing a fresh crack within the Western camp at a time of mounting energy and geopolitical pressure. On March 12, the U.S. Treasury Department announced a one-month waiver allowing countries to purchase Russian oil already stranded at sea, describing the move as a temporary step aimed at easing pressure on global energy markets. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom were all reported to be hesitant or openly critical of Washington providing even limited sanctions relief to Russia, reflecting serious concern across Europe about the signal such a move would send. Despite pushback from key allies, Trump went ahead and temporarily eased the Russia-related sanctions anyway, showing that the White House was willing to override European objections in order to address the oil market shock. European leaders are seen as opposing such a move because they believe any easing of sanctions could ultimately strengthen Moscow's finances and help expand Russia's war chest during the conflict in Ukraine. Meanwhile, European Union voices and Commission-linked officials pushed back sharply against the U.S. decision, arguing that this was not the time to relax pressure on Russia while war-related energy turmoil continued to reshape global markets.
In an interview with the Financial Times, Kaja Kallas said, I quote, "The EU is actively trying to change the dynamic," unquote, in the war in Iran by exploring ways to restart shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. So my question would be, how is the EU trying to change the dynamic? And secondly, does this also involve maybe to send a number of multiple warships that are already in the Eastern Mediterranean to, I don't know, protect oil vessels and safe passage? Thank you.
Yes, indeed. We are closely engaged with our partners in the Gulf and in the Middle East to limit the impact of the military escalation. Why? Because the security of the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf region is a priority to us. We, as EU, remain committed to help safeguard maritime routes and ensure the uninterrupted flow of energy and goods. This is why we have our maritime operations, Atalante and Aspides, in the region to continue delivering their protection tasks and monitor the situation closely. Now, as European navies are increasing their presence in the region, we will work to ensure that all efforts remain fully complementary. And I will leave it there. We have a Foreign Affairs Council on Monday.
I want to know the view of or any reaction about the decision of the United States to erase the sanctions on Russian oil on the sea. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. We understand that the exception the U.S. has granted is limited in time and in scope to vessels already at sea. And of course, I would encourage you to contact our counterparts in the U.S. if you have further questions regarding the measures they've put in place. The Commission remains convinced that the oil price cap and our sanctions against Russia are well targeted, and they remain in place also in the current situation of volatility on oil markets. The oil price cap has been effective in reducing Russian oil export revenues while maintaining the stability of oil markets. And Russian export volumes have remained broadly stable. And Russia should absolutely not benefit from the war on Iran.
Let me just complement to what Siobhan just said with something that the President von der Leyen said in very, very clear terms this week. It is not the time to relax sanctions on Russia. And just to put it also in perspective, Russia has been earning, we're informed, $150 million per day on additional revenues from oil sales since the beginning of the conflict in the Middle East, which makes Russia probably the biggest beneficiary of this conflict. So also in this context, it's not the time to relax sanctions on Russia.
Yes, Paula, on this as well, because I understand your position that you repeated actually yesterday, but the issue here is also of trust, because there was a G7 statement from all the leaders saying quite clearly that the sanctions will remain in place against Russia, and this statement was also signed obviously by President Donald Trump himself as a G7 member. And 2 days after the statement, we have this decision from the United States. So the question is, can you still trust the United States? And do you think the United States is actively benefiting Russia with its actions? Thank you.
Listen, Jorge, we stay committed to what we have said in the G7. And in terms of benefits, as said, clearly, at the moment, Russia is benefiting from the sale of its oil in the current situation.
Hi, David Abiyago from Argus Media. Can you just really clearly, simply spell out what that means in terms of supplying Russian oil under this waiver within EU jurisdiction? That is totally ruled out. How if an EU supplier uses a tanker that's supplying elsewhere globally under this waiver, what happens to that tanker? Thanks.
Thanks, David. I think you're getting into a whole lot of hypotheticals at the moment. And then there's an aspect of your question which I think probably is more pertinent for our counterparts in the U.S. We always say, and we'll continue not to speculate on hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah, it's a follow-up on the same theme. I don't think it's hypothetical. If I'm a European company or I'm a European country, I want to know what I should do. Do I follow US rules? Do I follow EU rules?
The U.S. has said they have put something in place which is limited to vessels that are already at sea. So I would take the U.S. at their word. And then we remain, as always, our oil price cap and all of our sanctions remain in place.
Our sanctions remain in place and the respective enforcement remains in place.
Yes, thank you, Paola. It's more for you, I guess. Will President von der Leyen raise directly the issue with President Trump, or will other members of the Commission raise the issue with Scott Bessent or in other, let's say, low-level of official contacts? I know that you are constantly in contact with the US, so are you going to raise this problem with them directly? Thank you.
Thank you, David. Indeed, there are several fora in which this issue could be raised. One is the G7 in its various formations. One where very often the sanctions are discussed. There's a dedicated formation on the sanctions and the financing ministers. So there are indeed various fora where the issue could be raised. I can't tell you now exactly when and where, but our position is also pretty well known and has been made very explicit as recently as this week at the video conference at leaders level of the G7. Which brings us to the question on the Iranian sanctions, where, I don't know, Siobhan, if you have anything else to say there, but in any case, I guess it's the same. We are enforcing our sanctions against Iran, and that remains in place.